Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Jennifer Jarvis with me here today. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us. Jennifer is one of the apprentices in the Bio-Mystical Womb Apprenticeship this first round of the 13 Moon Apprenticeship. And I wanted to come on and invite Jennifer to share about your experience with the Menarche healing practices that we've just recently completed in this first round of the apprenticeship. Well, some of the apprentices have completed it. Everyone's going at their own pace, but Jennifer just recently sent in testimonial work, and as many of you might know, many of the participants are also offering writing about their experience to be case studies in the work and in the book and in the blog. So we've got all that in the works, and we thought we'd come on and do a podcast to share with you and to talk about this process of traveling back in time to nurture our menarchal self. And for those of you who might not be familiar with this term, menarche is the term for a young woman's first bleeding, okay, a young woman's first blood. And so when many of us didn't have adequate, appropriate initiation ceremonies or practices. Barely were even taught about the fertility of our developing bodies at that time. The bare minimum, and very focused on the biology and no real attention to the emotional, spiritual, psychological development that's going on at that time, which is significant and substantial and needs tending. And so this is a time when many young women, young girls starting to come into puberty and starting bleeding have a huge dip in self-confidence. And, the disparity between self-esteem in young women and young men grows humongously, if that's a term. Humongously? Not sure. But
Yeah.
I think it ought to be, because that disparity grows a lot. Young men continue to develop their self-esteem, their confidence, and young women plummet. And then, not to mention people of varying genders that don't fit into that heteronormative male-female dichotomy. This is also at puberty, is when that self-confidence, that self-esteem plummets, whether there's menstruation going on or not, because there's so much around that age that needs to be fully initiated and educated on all levels, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all of it. And yet it's so blanketly neglected and shamed and really treated poorly by our mainstream society. And so in the Bio-Mystical Womb Apprenticeship and in many other feminine mystery schools, recapitulating menarche and recapitulating coming of age ceremonies is a very important part of our healing process. So I'd love to turn it over to you, Jennifer, and have you share about your experience of doing that and what it was about for you. What has changed for you in your life, in your feelings of self-confidence? How did this help you along your journey?
Thank you. Great points. Great question. So the experience in itself was very surprising. I didn't know what to expect. I don't think I really had any expectations. It was just like this beautiful open plain of wonder. And I remember just like witnessing the contrast of what it was like through my real experience back, at 11 years old, to my first menstruation, and how it was handled, what was talked about, what wasn't talked about what I was exposed to prior. And the only thing I knew about about menstruation was that was dangerous for a young girl. That, basically, my understanding was if you bleed, you can breed. So pregnancy was the number one risk, which was also, associated with STDs. And it became a very frightening time because there was no education about, any other aspect of my menstrual cycle than basically my belief was, okay, once I started to bleed, I was at risk for pregnancy, and the blood didn't belong to me. There was no other connection other than to the masculine, the men, that the purpose of my body bleeding was for reproduction. And that was reinforced only through the education that came through and, health class. So there was no celebration, there was no initiation, there were no discussions at all. It was completely absent, just like what you mentioned. In fact, my parents' reaction to it, my father flipped out because there was a lot of focus about the attraction with boys, and my mother was like, here's the calendar, here's where the pads are, and off you go. So it was just very, linear. It goes this, and this, and this. So flash forward to my popping a tent. It was interesting. I had skipped my cycle for 2 months. And then on the pink moon, and I believe that was April, the full moon, I bled. And I was like, oh my God, it's here. And then in May, the flower moon came. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to have my own ceremony. My daughter and the neighborhood girls were there. The friend of mine who was living next door came in. So it was very traditional. It became about studying the moon and the cycles and how it influences the body and foraging. So there was this beautiful womb rite of passage that was taking place. That was both taking in the cosmic, taking in the earthly. So to me, it was like combining the spiritual aspect and the physical aspect. Through this, for the first time, when I was in a meditation, it was at night. I could hear drumming. And they were like, all of a sudden I got this feeling like ancestors. I could cry just thinking about it. It was so powerful. Like ancestors were on the other side drumming. And this was real. And all of a sudden there was this access of information and understanding that this blood, in a very different way for me, because I do blood bonding, but this time it was claimed, really truly claimed, that this blood was mine and it came for me. So this healed so much and brought so much ownership and wholeness and empowerment that I began to understand why I had no expectation. There was this blank space of mystery because I was just supposed to journey in it through whatever was in there in the blood and the message for me. And I remember at one point that I could really feel like the pulsing of my womb. And that was something, it was almost like as the ancestors were drumming, and the pulsing of my womb was almost like the song in this communication is going back and forth. So I began to notice some shifts, like boundaries before were really solidified. A lot of the, you mentioned confidence, there was this piece of me that always shrunk, and I couldn't understand why. but my understanding is connecting to my blood, not as in a ways like every time it came that it was this threat, to now it was this gift in a very special way. So the psychosocial aspect of bleeding shifted, self-empowerment shifted, boundaries shifted, consciousness shifted. So there's this part of me that was always missing that became alive. And that feeling of wholeness and union was there. So that began to like really bloom. Then one day, like I could feel something stirring, you know, in the back and inside. And I just knew, okay, something's coming, but I didn't know what. And then one day, there it was, it's all right, it's always in the tub. So up to my bathroom, and I grabbed the tulle and the roses that I had at the red tents that I used to do, and that was in the tent with me then. And I actually wore it. And what the name of this costuming was, like, I put on this, all I had on underneath really was this belly dancing belt that happened to cover the front, and then a necklace. And all of it was called the Blood Bride. And I was marrying my blood at that time. It was this very sacred union between me and my blood. So on went the tulle and the I took red lipstick and I mixed it with my menstrual blood because I do capture it, and have it on my blood bonding altar. And so I drew some moons on my forehead, and the third eye, of course, was the full moon that represented, because I was bleeding then. So that went on, and then the spiral, and in between I colored in with my menstrual blood, and I did my own ritual to marry myself, to marry my blood in this way, and to listen to the messages between me and it go back and forth. And I felt like on a very real, like cellular level, that parts of me opened up. It was like this, you know, explosion. And the strength and clarity that came forth, I really lose the dexterity of language to be able to explain. It was just really powerful. And I was like, okay, I have to have someone take pictures of this. So I called to my daughter. She's 10. And I was at first, you know, it was like, here it came back up, was how is she going to react to seeing her mom, you know, just like this, and the smell, you know, like you could smell my blood in the room. And her being my daughter, I wondered, you know, on what primal level, and what was that going to invoke in her. And she came in and she was elated that she said, can I paint stuff on you? So she wrote the word free above the spiral around my belly button. She made the bird or a duck. And she connected the moons across my forehead, and she drew the flowers. I had rose petals on my nipples, and she drew flower petals around that to make flowers. And then she made these stick figures on my face. And I could see it with her, you know, speaking of confidence, like she was confident, and then it was like, oh, I don't know about the eye. And I looked at it, and it looks like two things. It looks like 3 different stick figures, like with one of them drumming. And I wanted to cry. It moves me so much because like she could hear it. She tuned in to my sitting in the tent with her that night. She was asleep and I was still up when I heard the ancestors drumming. I get goosebumps. And then the other, it also looks like a woman stirring a cauldron. So either way, I was just beside myself. And for her and I, it brought us closer. And I could see this rise in her as well. And I could feel this healing go on between mother and daughter. And that actually rewrote a lot, because all of my cousins, every one of them, and myself have a disconnected story with our mothers and our cycles, and plagued with PMDD. So it's really interesting watching what's transpiring and the hopes that it opens up. And so one of the things I made some notes about was growth. So the physical growth that happens after, young girls have their first cycle, and how, like you mentioned, there was such a physical focus, that the mental, emotional, and spiritual growth is really, really super important. And that I have to put my glasses on. So I made some notes about that, about balancing, like not fearing that primal nature, claiming that union, and how it's like a gateway to a union with the other aspects of ourselves, like our mind, body, spirit, emotion, and harnessing that. And I've noticed, like, for me specifically, I can witness to the healing comes through my symptoms of anxiety, insomnia, the sporadic bleeding, the heavy bleeding. Remember, I was constantly bleeding out. That has stopped, and it is like right on and right on schedule. And I used to get migraine headaches every time my cycle, right before it began and right when it ended. I had so many symptoms that now they've either totally gone or they're greatly reduced. Cramping is one of the things that have like greatly reduced. So the healing that's come on, with physical, because of the the psychological and the spiritual aspect being worked on just through feeling okay, and realizing that it trickles down to, it's not dangerous to be a woman because we bleed, that it has a totally different aspect to its existence. And so did I as a female. And in claiming my blood is also claiming that part, it's claiming every aspect that was missing and bringing all of that in. And like it almost felt like this beautiful, it was like this bride of something that I just don't have the way to describe, but it's definitely cosmic and earthly, and it's very primal. But it was like I was sitting on my own throne of power and love and discipline and wisdom, that for the first time I felt more like me than any other time in my life. And it didn't matter that I'm 49, I'm 49 years old, and I'm like, oh my God, am I near the end, of bleeding? How much longer am I going to bleed? But it was such a beautiful experience to see myself in that way, to have my daughter see me that way, and to have her also go through like a pre-initiation, you know, because she knows what's coming when her first one's when her first one's happening. So I felt like, oh, this is kind of like her own way to relate to the energy and what it means to her through my modeling. So yeah,
Well,
she painted me up.
she painted you up, and I feel like this is such an important thing to include in this, because as those of us who didn't have this type of initiation when we were that age are, you know, healing that for ourselves, giving that to ourselves perhaps, and then perhaps we have daughters that we want to give that to. But if they don't witness us, if she didn't witness you doing that for yourself and witness the changes, the empowerment that was happening for you in that, she, you know, the young girls, I've talked with plenty of moms who want to give this to their daughters, but their daughters don't have a context for it and have been too heavily indoctrinated already by society to have an interest in any of that to begin with. And what I've seen, though, in communities where this is happening, where people are doing this together and, you know, offering initiation to the young women, and the young girls are seeing that and knowing that that's coming for them, that there's much that builds like an anticipation and a desire at an earlier age before all that indoctrination gets so heavily ingrained. And so I just think it's so beautiful that you shared this reinitiation of yourself in such an in-depth way and a visceral way, that she got to paint your body and be with you naked in the smell of your blood in that room. And, you know, that's something that's been so, um, you know, bleached out of our society, to our detriment, is, you know, the smell of women's menstrual blood. It creates sort of a change when anyone who's smelling it, even if you're not bleeding, it can be sort of psychedelic, if you will, and you know, create these pathways of connection to hearing the ancestors' drum beats and all of these things. And if we imagine back to the time when all the women in the village would be menstruating together, and there weren't so many, like, you know, hygienic ways of hiding the blood or getting rid of the smell of the blood, and all of the women would be bleeding together at the dark moon, and the whole village of women, everyone is smelling the menstrual blood all at once, and the whole village would go into a visionary state and perhaps um, have celebrations around that, of beating the drums under the dark moon around the fire, and telling stories and listening to the ancestors. And, you know, even if the women would then retreat to a red tent space, there would be people bringing them food and
Yeah.
being in ceremony around the red tent, you know, and waiting with bated breath for the reports back from the realm that the menstruating women would go into so deeply, and feeling that the flavor of that realm in their own bodies, and the young girls and the young boys and people of all genders really having a reverence for this process, because, and a recognition of the fact that that's where life comes from,
Mhm.
and that these women are, and that women can go to the source of life every month and receive wisdom and information and guidance for the whole community. And so as we start to reinitiate ourselves and remember these traditions and start to integrate them back into our disjointed lives, it's such a healing process, especially in your family. So I'm so grateful that that you shared this with your daughter, and that now she has something of her own creation to look forward to. She has the sound of the ancestors' drum beats in her blood already as she's approaching her menstruation. And she has this to refer to when she gets the sterilized information from school or from her, peers, or when she hears their fears or concerns about it, or sees their self-esteem plummet as the ones that are older than her, or whatever, that as others start the journey without this experience. And she might have very profound questions to ask you, and stories to tell you about her peers and what they're going through. And I can't wait to hear stories of that and how you respond and what you do with her for community healing. Because, what if she tells other young girls about her experience and the potential for this being a really beautiful thing, and then they come to you and want, I mean, could be the beginning if this is a powerful thing to you. It sounds like it really rings true for you, to be able to offer this to other families and like that. Just saying.
Thank you. I love all of that. Like, I can just lie in the feeling of it and marinate there. Like, I know you're a red tent sister, so that brings me so much joy. And she did grow up. I used to own my own spiritual wellness center, and I had one room in there it was called the Red Room. And my husband, actually, we were up till 3 a.m. and we set up the tulle and the red cloth and made a tent. And the whole room in there and all the artwork that was in there was done, only artwork that was done by women in their hands.
Wow.
And so she got to come in, and like help set up and see. And some of them she couldn't stay, but she's used to women coming into the home, and we've had some red tents here in my house. So she's used to seeing it. But again, I always felt like there was so much more. There was something I was missing. And then going through this apprenticeship and reclaiming this, and it was very special. And I did want to address another point. I have 2 boys. Well, they're young men. They're in their 20s. And oddly, it was interesting, because I used to just capture my blood and keep it up in my bedroom, my bathroom, and my altar there. And then I said, I was downstairs a lot, so I just started to capture it down there. Well, my bathroom downstairs, like a gum wrapper could sit on the floor for 3 weeks. I was the only one who would clean, right? So I was like, great, I can just hide the jar, down close to the wall where the toilet is, and no one will see it because they don't even pick up a wrapper. That's in plain sight. So one day, a few weeks went by because I just kept it in there. A couple of weeks went by, and then I grabbed the jar and I came out, and my son and his girlfriend were living here at that time, and they go, "What is that?" And I was like, "What? This?" And I was just kind of like playing silly, and they go, "Yeah." They're like, "We saw it." And the girl was like, "I almost drank it." And he's like, "I picked it up and I opened up and smelled it." And everybody in my house, then at that point, it became a topic of discussion, and they had all found it. And I was like, how profound is that? That here it was tucked, but they sniffed it out. And, like, they can't pick up a wrapper or a sock, but they can find like my son. For me, it was very profound because like he was able to find my blood, like hidden behind the toilet base. And I was like, wow, the power of what we don't even consciously smell, but the subconscious, and what gets picked up, and how their curious nature brought them into this point of investigating and wanting to become intimate with blood. And I thought, well, that's really peculiar, so there was a lot of exploration, like with that intimacy with blood, and how we're taught that it's a biohazard and it's dangerous, and we must stay away from it because you'll get infected by it in some way. That our true nature, to me, and what I witnessed in this event, my personal observation was, that's not what we're taught. that the true nature is go and investigate it and become intimate with it, and realizing that that is the first thing we smell at birth is the blood, and how powerful that is, and how, you know, it just stays with us. So that was a little piece that I just like, yeah. And I have.
So I'm really curious, Jennifer, about what you shared with them. I mean, I know this is very intimate, and I'm amazed at how much you're sharing about this process of getting intimate with the blood with your family without sharing the actual details of what actually. And you know, it's almost like this blood, this jar of blood that you know, kind of were hiding behind the toilet, was actually turned into this homing beacon for your sons and their girlfriends and the whole family to
Yeah.
get involved with this reclaiming of the blood and prepare for this, you marrying your blood without you even really trying. And it sounds like the way you're sharing about it, it sounds like it was all a very uplifting and a positive thing. There was humor, there was lightheartedness. And I mean, I imagine if I had ever done that, or if my mom, for example, had ever done that with our family, there would have been a huge uproar,
Mm.
you know, and I'm imagining other listeners couldn't even imagine having other family members finding a jar of their blood behind the toilet, and the tension and weirdness that would ensue. And yet the way that you're describing this with that giggle and that huge grin on your face, and the humor that it sounds like, that I want to like be a fly on the wall for that conversation. Can you remember any of the details of what you could share about that conversation?
I remember a lot of the physical sensation, because it's like right now there was a lot of openness and giddy, joy. There was jokes like her saying, you know, like, I almost drank it. So there was like, you know, the imagination of how it would have tasted, what she would have done, and her being a vampire. And then my son was kind of like, thank God I didn't drink it. You know, so there was a little bit of play, you know, to that. But for me, it was just like this standing back at one point, and I zeroed in on my son. Um, and it was because he's a strong intuitive and just an amazing young man, and just wondering, you know, like what was happening in that moment, as you know, like what did he think when he found it, and like what was going on inside of him, to make him open it up and smell it, that he needed, like everybody who saw it had to touch it and open it. So for me, there was still a lot of inquiry and curiosity to wondering what was happening. You know, so like the zoning in is they went in and out, and the whole house is starting to play on one another, was more like of that curiosity of what was going on, what was healing, what was there. My daughter.
Did you share with them about what was going on? Because
Oh
it's like
yeah.
suddenly, I mean, I'm just really struck by this sudden urge on your part. And I hear that it was a practical thing. You were starting to use the downstairs bathroom more, so it made sense for you to have a receptacle there when you needed to change your cup or whatever it was. And that it made sense because of the gum wrapper never getting clean. Nobody would be looking behind the toilet. But there was part of you going,
Yeah.
right? I can just tell that there's part of you going, I'm not hiding this anymore. No, sirree, Bob. In fact, I'm going to just put this here and see what happens. You know, it's like,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And so there's that sort of trickster curiosity that
You
you
got
were
it.
like out of the closet. We're not hiding in the upstairs bathroom anymore. This is mom. And this is
Yes.
everything about mom. And I'm claiming this blood, and I'm claiming everyone in the family with this
Yes.
blood, it feels
Yeah.
like to me, of
It
like,
was.
I'm going to put this here. And yeah, I'm pretending to hide it behind the toilet because, okay, but not really. Okay. And so what did you say to them? I mean, besides just giggling and laughing and letting the conversation sort of do what it did, what did
Yeah.
you share? I'm sure they were asking you, Mom, why did you put this here? You know, why is it suddenly here? We've never seen this before. What are you doing? What did you
Yeah.
say?
So I went upstairs. I was proud in that moment. That I went upstairs. Alana, my daughter, she knows about all of this before the rest of them do. You know, like the artwork and everything. It's done with her. The dialogue is there,
She's the 10-year
and
old.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, she's 10.
Mm-hmm.
So I went upstairs and I have this painting that I did. Actually, it was with Alana. I think like in 2018 or 19. But anyway, it was mixed. The paint was mixed with my blood. So I brought that down, and I'm like, well, here's what I'm doing, you know, and my blood bonding altar is upstairs. So they knew I did red tents. They knew I was doing womb connection. So they had an idea. They had a concept
Mm-hmm.
of what I was doing. They didn't know the details.
Mm-hmm.
So the Magdalene, I did a Magdalene vision quest, and that like that's where the blood bonding altar came out from. So Kayla, my son's girlfriend, she came after I brought down the artwork and I put it back up. She came up with me. So that was the first time, you know, it's in my closet with all my clothes, you know. So when you said coming out of the closet, I'm like, how did she know?
So wait a second.
Literally.
Your blood bonding altar is in your closet. Okay, I think I've heard you write about, I've seen you write about this before, where it's a nice private space where you can go and sit and do your meditations without being disturbed. So it makes sense.
Yes.
You have a large enough closet for this to, but now you brought it out of the closet, or you
Yeah.
brought someone into the closet to see it.
Yeah.
You'd never seen it before. So in a
Yeah.
sense, that's coming out of the closet, if you will, making the closet more of a publicly shared space. Right now, you might not
Absolutely.
have your red tent in there. Maybe
You know.
just you and your daughter and your son's girlfriend maybe one day could all fit in there. I don't know. Maybe it's not big enough for that.
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah. It's huge.
it's huge. So you could have a small group of intimate people that wanted to learn this blood bonding magic with you or participated in it with you. So
Yeah.
beautiful. So there was just all this curiosity. They knew you were doing all this stuff with the red tent. They knew that stuff was going on that they didn't know. And
Yeah.
so that, I'm sure there'd been curiosity, but you know, too busy to ask mom a bunch of questions and you know, other things going on in life. And then suddenly there's this jar behind the toilet. What the
Yeah.
heck is that? Oh wow, this is such an entrancing story. I'm just loving to hearing how, with such lightheartedness and such mirth and joy and uh, confidence, that you're weaving this awareness into your family. I know this is a big question for probably a lot of women who start to reclaim these things for themselves. How do I communicate about this with my family? How do I introduce these ideas and these practices and these ceremonies to my family? And so your story is so valuable in that regard, giving people a context of how it could develop. And so how long have you been involved in red tents, and you said you used to have a healing center where you had a red room.
Yeah.
How many years? I mean, this has been part of their lives for quite a few years. Is that right?
Yeah. So in late 2013 to early 2014 is when I started the red tents.
Mm-hmm.
Then I opened up my own spiritual wellness center. I co-hosted. First I attended, and then I co-hosted with the woman at the belly dancing place. And then when it was really interesting, I opened up my own, like something in it was like, I could feel like, you need to do a red tent, you need to do a red tent. And I wasn't sure. So I just put it out there. And then I remember that was the first time, like the depth, the beginning of the surface to the depth of blood came in, because I bled for 6 weeks straight. And then I just started bleeding on the new moon with every red tent. There it was. And then I got diagnosed with cancer, and my business closed, and my cycle was just really erratic after that. You know, some of it was from the chemo and the medical intervention of the onset of menopause, and then my remembering back to knowing that it was really important for me to bleed, that the blood, you know, it was very important to not interfere with the process. And when I did the research, I found that what was inside was right, because you know, osteoporosis because of the blood loss in the bones, and then Alzheimer's disease because of the connection, you know, with the blood in the womb and in the brain. So there is this, like, my womb's right to life. So this work has been a very slow flowing process. And then I met Tiffany Krieger, who went through hers, and then she linked me to you. And ever since this apprenticeship, it feels like because going through her was the initial awakening, but this here has been like the womb initiation. Like, this is what's really woke it up, and it's maturing and growing. So from back in like 2013 and 14 to now is where all of this work has come in those kinds of avenues.
Powerful. Well, thank you so much for sharing so openly about this very intimate process. I've really always appreciated how willing you are to share um, so many beautiful details about your explorations of ceremony and personal transformation and blood mysteries. It's just such a blessing that we get to share these conversations with the Womb Centered Healing Temple and the wider public. I feel like this is the thread of evolution for humanity, so that we can return to harmonious relationships with our own bodies, with each other, with the planet, with all creatures and all beings, and that we can truly become the answers to our ancestors' prayers and hear those drum beats pulsing within us and live those answers to those prayers. So thank you for leading the way and hand in hand joining in our circle of Bio-Mystical Womb apprentices and practitioners, which I'm really excited to talk about that more as this first round of apprentices will be completing in November. We'll be graduating to become mentors, and there'll be more training opportunities to advance the practices for you and the other apprentices. But there'll also be the opportunity to mentor the new um, batch of apprentices that come in and support each other through the process. So I'm really excited um, to announce that, and to welcome any listeners who have been considering or feel drawn to this work to reach out to me, Sama Morningstar, through the website at samamorningstar.com. You can also find it at wombcenteredhealing.com. Reach out to me on social media, and we can set up a conversation to talk about the next round of the apprenticeship starting at the end of October. Um, So I look forward to talking with you all soon. And thanks again, Jennifer, for joining us on the podcast. And that's all for now. Many blessings and be well.